I'm Lucia, 33 years old, an Air Force major and a ghost operative that even my own father doesn't know exists. At MacDill Air Force Base, amidst 200 senior officers, the smell of stale coffee and suffocating silence filled the room as my father, General Neves, laughed right in my face. He pointed a finger, his voice booming across the auditorium. "Sit down, Lucia. You are a zero. Don't embarrass me." He had no idea that the man who had just walked through the doors, a commanding Navy SEAL colonel, wasn't there to see him. He was there to find me. And my code name wasn't the general's daughter. My father thought he was the most powerful man in the room. But when I read the file labeled Ghost 13, his face went from flush red to ghost white. He had made the biggest mistake of his life. Comment, justice, and subscribe if you've ever been underestimated by your own family. This is a story about the price of arrogance. The air in the strategic briefing room at MacDill Air Force Base always smelled the same: burnt coffee, industrial floor wax, and the metallic tang of aggressive air conditioning. It was a cold, sterile smell, the scent of bureaucracy and power. I sat in the back row, seat Z14, my spine pressed against the hard plastic of the chair. My uniform was pressed sharp enough to cut glass, my blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun so tight it pulled at my temples. I made myself small. I made myself invisible. It was a survival mechanism I had perfected over 3 decades, not in SEER school, but at the dinner table. Down in the front row, under the bright fluorescent lights, sat the VIPs. And right in the center, holding court like a king on a throne, was my father, General Arthur Neves. He was 60, but he wore his years like medals. His silver hair was cut in a high and tight fade that defied gravity. And his skin was tanned from weekends on the golf course with senators. He was laughing loudly at something a lieutenant colonel had just whispered to him. It was a booming, practiced laugh, the kind designed to fill a room and remind everyone who owned the oxygen in it. "That's rich, Johnson. That's rich," my father bellowed, slapping his knee. The surrounding officers chuckled in unison, a chorus of sycophants. They didn't laugh because it was funny. They laughed because he was a general with 3 stars on his shoulder, and their careers depended on his mood. I looked down at my hands. They were steady. They had to be. I thought of Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor I read every night before bed. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. I took a breath, holding it for 4 counts, releasing for 4. Then, the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure change. The heavy double doors at the back of the auditorium swung open, but not with the usual creak. They burst open with controlled violence. The chatter in the room died instantly. Even my father's laughter was cut short, caught in his throat like a fishbone. A man walked in. He didn't walk. He stalked. He was wearing the Navy working uniform, the digital camouflage looking out of place in this sea of Air Force blue. On his collar, the silver eagle of a full colonel. On his chest, the trident of a Navy SEAL. Colonel Marcus Hale. I knew him. Not socially, but operationally. We had shared an extraction helicopter in Kandahar 3 years ago. He was a legend in the special operations community, a man who didn't play politics. He played for keeps. He ignored the 200 heads turning toward him. He ignored the protocol. He walked straight down the center aisle, his boots thudding rhythmically against the carpet. He stopped 10 feet from the stage, looking directly at the panel of generals. "General Neves," Hale said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the back of the room with terrifying clarity. It was gravel and sandpaper. My father blinked, clearly annoyed at having his spotlight stolen. He adjusted his tie, putting on his benevolent leader mask. "Colonel Hale, to what do we owe this interruption? We are in the middle of a strategic assessment." "I don't have time for assessments, General," Hale said, cutting him off. "I have a situation developing in Sierra Tango sector. I need a Tier 1 asset, immediate deployment." My father scoffed, leaning back. "We have plenty of pilots here, Colonel. Take your pick." "I don't need a pilot," Hale said. "I need a ghost. specifically a TSSCI clearance sniper with deep reconnaissance capability. The room went silent. TSSCI, top secret, sensitive compartmented information. That wasn't just high clearance, that was doesn't exist clearance. Hale scanned the room, his eyes moving like a predator seeking prey. I was told the asset is in this room. My heart hammered against my ribs. Do it, Lucia. I didn't look at my father. I didn't look at the confused faces of the men around me. I focused on the exit sign above Hale's head. I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping against the floor echoed like a gunshot in a library. Heads turned. 200 pairs of eyes shifted from the stage to the back row. I stood at attention, shoulders back, chin up, a perfect statue of military discipline. Marcus Hale turned slowly. His eyes locked onto mine. There was no recognition in his face, just professional assessment. He nodded, once. But before he could speak, a voice boomed from the front. Sit down. It was my father. He wasn't looking at Hale anymore. He was looking at me. His face had transformed. The benevolent leader was gone. In his place was the man who used to inspect my room with a white glove when I was 10. His face was twisted in a mixture of embarrassment and rage. Major Neves, he barked, his voice dripping with condescension. Did you not hear me? I said, sit down. General, I started, my voice steady despite the trembling in my knees. The colonel requested. I don't care what he requested, my father shouted, standing up to assert his dominance. He looked around the room, offering a tight, apologetic smile to the other officers, as if I were an unruly toddler who had just spilled juice on the carpet. Apologies, gentlemen, my father said, his tone shifting to a dismissive chuckle. He pointed a finger at me, a finger that felt like a weapon. My daughter. She gets confused. She works in administration, logistics, and supply chains. She has a tendency to overstate her importance. The room exhaled. The tension broke. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. Admin? Someone whispered nearby. She stood up for a sniper request? That's rich? Sit down, Lucia, my father said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low growl that only family members would recognize. You are a zero in this equation. Don't make me ashamed of you, not here. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. The verse from Proverbs flashed in my mind. I stood there for 3 seconds. 3 seconds that felt like 3 lifetimes. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, not from shame, but from a cold, hard fury. He didn't just dismiss me, he erased me. To him, the uniform I wore was a costume. The rank on my shoulder was a decoration. I slowly lowered myself back into the chair. My father nodded, satisfied. He had put the dog back in the kennel. He turned back to Marcus Hale, flashing a winning smile. Now, Colonel, let's find you a real operator, shall we? But I wasn't looking at the floor anymore. I lifted my head and looked straight at my father's back. He turned his head slightly, catching my eye for a brief second before dismissing me again. That look. It was the same look of utter casual contempt. The look that said you are nothing. The look that said you are just a girl. The air conditioning hummed, cold and indifferent. But as I stared at the back of his head, the briefing room melted away. The smell of coffee faded, replaced by the smell of roast turkey and wood polish. I wasn't a 33-year-old major anymore. I was 18 years old again, sitting at the mahogany dining table in Virginia. And my father was looking at me with those exact same eyes. The glare. That was the bridge between the present and the past. As I sat in that sterile briefing room in Florida, staring at the back of my father's head, the cold hum of the air conditioner faded away. It was replaced by the smell of sage stuffing, roast turkey, and the heavy, suffocating scent of wood polish. I was transported back to the suburbs of Northern Virginia. I was 18 years old. It was Thanksgiving Day. Our house was a sprawling, colonial-style mansion with white pillars and a manicured lawn that looked like it had been cut with nail scissors. Inside, it was a museum of my father's ego. Framed photos of him shaking hands with senators, shadow boxes filled with his medals, and an American flag folded into a perfect triangle on the mantel. The dining room table was set with the good china, the kind we were terrified to chip. My mother had spent 3 days preparing the meal. The turkey was golden brown, the cranberry sauce was perfectly jellied, and the sweet potato casserole was steaming in the center. But the air was so cold you could see your breath. "Pass the gravy," my father said, not looking up from his plate. In the background, the Dallas Cowboys game was blaring from the living room TV, the roar of the crowd punctuating the silence at our table. I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking under the table, clenching the napkin until my knuckles turned white. I had news. Big news. I had been holding it in for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. Surely, on a day of thanks, on a day of family, he would finally see me. "Dad," I started, my voice small. "I got the letter today." He kept chewing, slicing a piece of white meat with surgical precision. "What letter?" "The Air Force," I said, unable to keep the pride from leaking into my voice. "I got in." "Not just in, Dad. I qualified for the specialized track. My ASVAB scores were in the 99th percentile." My mother froze, the gravy boat suspended in midair. She looked at him, her eyes wide, pleading with him silently to be kind. Just this once. My father slowly placed his fork down. The clinking sound against the china echoed like a gavel. He finally looked at me. It wasn't a look of pride. It was a look of confusion, as if I had just told him I planned to become a circus clown. "Nursing?" he asked. "Or logistics?" "Combat operations," I corrected him, sitting straighter. "I want to fly. Or maybe intel." He laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. He picked up his wineglass, swirling the expensive Cabernet. "Lucia, honey, let's be realistic. The military is a hard life. It's not for someone of your disposition. You want to help people? Be a nurse. Find a nice officer in the medical corps. Don't play soldier." My heart shattered. Just like that. "But Dad," I pushed, "my scores were higher than yours were when you enlisted." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Scores are paper," he snapped. "War is blood. You don't have the stomach for it." He turned away from me, dismissing my entire future with a wave of his hand. He looked at my brother, Jason, who was sitting across from me. Jason, the golden boy. Jason, who had just dropped out of UVA because the pressure was too much and had spent the last 3 months sleeping on the couch and playing video games. "Jason," my father's voice softened instantly, becoming warm and fatherly. "How's the job hunt coming, son? No rush, you know. You need to find yourself. Take your time. We're proud of you for knowing your limits." Jason shrugged, stuffing a roll into his mouth. "Thanks, Dad." I looked down at my plate. The turkey looked like ash. The injustice burned in my throat like acid. Jason quit, and he was supported. I excelled, and I was dismissed. That night, while the rest of the house slept, I lay on the floor of my bedroom. I reached under my bed and pulled out an old Nike shoebox. This was my secret. This was my shame. Inside weren't love letters or diaries. Inside were ribbons. Blue ribbons from the local shooting range. Certificates for high scorer from the ROTC summer camp I'd attended without telling him. I ran my fingers over the gold foil of the awards. I had to hide them. Every time I had tried to show him a target sheet with a tight grouping, he would sneer. "Guns are for men, Lucia. A woman holding a rifle looks ridiculous. It looks desperate." So, I learned to hide my talent. I learned to be ashamed of the one thing I was truly gifted at. I shoved the box back into the dark, gathering dust with the monsters under the bed. I went downstairs for a glass of water. My mother was in the kitchen, scrubbing the roasting pan. Her hands were red and raw from the hot water. She looked tired. She always looked tired. "Mom," I whispered, "why does he do that? Why does he hate that I want to serve?" She sighed, not turning around. She kept scrubbing, the steel wool scratching against the metal. "He doesn't hate it, Lucia. He worries. He's from a different time. The old guard. He thinks he's protecting you." "He's not protecting me," I said, my voice trembling. He's erasing me. She turned off the water and dried her hands on a dish towel. She walked over and touched my cheek. Her hand was warm, but her eyes were empty. Don't cause a scene, honey. Please. For me? Just let him be the general. It's easier that way. The complicity of silence. She loved me, but she feared him more. That pattern never changed. It followed me out of that house and into the uniform. 3 years later, during advanced tactical training in the Mojave Desert, I took a bad fall during a night rappelling drill. I tore my rotator cuff and fractured 2 ribs. I was in the base hospital for 3 days. I didn't call him. I knew better. But my mother did. I waited for a call. A card, even a generic, "get well soon," with his signature stamped by a secretary. Nothing came. On the 4th day, as I was packing my bag to leave the hospital, my phone buzzed. A text message from Dad. My heart jumped. I was 21, a grown woman, a commissioned officer, yet I was still a desperate child waiting for a crumb. I opened the message. "Mom told me you got hurt. Told you it wasn't a playground. You've made your point. Resign your commission and come home. The neighbor's son, Patrick, is single. He's a lawyer. Time to get married and stop this nonsense." I stared at the screen until the backlight turned off, leaving me in darkness. He didn't ask if I was in pain. He didn't ask if I was okay. He saw my pain as an opportunity to prove himself right. He saw my broken bones as a sign that I should go back to the kitchen. If you have ever poured your heart into making someone proud, only to be met with cold indifference or criticism, please hit the like button and comment, "I am enough," below. Let's remind each other that our value isn't defined by anyone else's approval. I deleted the message. That was the night the sadness turned into something else. It turned into a cold, hard rock in the pit of my stomach. I stood in that hospital room, holding my injured arm, and asked myself the question that would haunt me for the next decade. Why am I still trying to prove myself to a man who is determined to be blind? If he wouldn't look at me when I was standing in the light, maybe I needed to go somewhere he couldn't look away from. Somewhere darker. Somewhere harder. I wasn't going to be a nurse. I wasn't going to be a lawyer's wife. I was going to become the thing he feared most. I was going to become a weapon he couldn't control. If you want to know what hell looks like, it isn't fire and brimstone. It's a drainage ditch in Georgia, 3 in the morning, with 40-degree mud seeping into your pores. I was 22 years old, lying prone in a ghillie suit that weighed 20 pounds when dry and 50 pounds when wet. I hadn't moved in 14 hours. My body was screaming. Every joint felt like it was being ground into dust. An ant was crawling across my eyelid, but I couldn't blink. If I blinked, the glint might give away my position to the spotters scanning the tree line with high-powered optics. This was sniper school. The washout rate was over 60%. For women, it was nearly impossible. Not because we couldn't shoot. Women are actually statistically better shooters due to lower centers of gravity and patience, but because of the grit. My bladder was full. Painfully full. In a normal life, in the life my father wanted for me, I would excuse myself and go to a tiled bathroom with potpourri on the counter. But here, in the mud, there was no timeout. Callous your mind, I thought. I focused on the voice in my head. It wasn't my father's voice anymore. It was David Goggins. I had listened to "Can't Hurt Me" on repeat during my rucks. I replayed his words now like a prayer. When you think you're done, you're only at 40% of your body's capability. I didn't move. I just let go. I felt the warmth spread through the suit, followed immediately by the freezing cold as the urine mixed with the mud. It was degrading. It was disgusting. And it was absolutely necessary. I lay there for another 18 hours in my own filth. When the instructors finally walked right past me, missing my position by inches, I didn't feel shame. I felt power. I had done what the Golden Boys couldn't do. I had erased myself to survive. 6 months later, the mud of Georgia was replaced by the dust of the Korangal Valley in Afghanistan. This wasn't training. This was the real show. My first assignment was overwatch for a SEAL platoon clearing a village suspected of harboring HVT, high-value target couriers. I was perched on a ridge, 800 yards out, looking through a Schmidt and Bender scope. My hands were trembling, just a little. This was the moment of truth. Guns are for men, my father had said. You don't have the stomach for it. Below me, the comms crackled. Taking fire, 3 o'clock, high elevation. I saw him. A fighter with an RPG popping up from behind a rock wall, aiming directly at the lead vehicle. The trembling stopped, instantly. My world narrowed down to the crosshairs. Windage, 3 clicks left. Elevation, adjusted for the angle. Breath in, breath out. Pause at the bottom of the exhale. Squeeze. The recoil of the M24 kicked my shoulder. A second later, pink mist sprayed against the gray rock. The fighter dropped. The RPG clattered harmlessly to the ground. Good effect on target, my spotter whispered. Clean kill. I didn't feel sick. I didn't feel sad. I felt a cold, professional satisfaction. I had just saved 4 American lives. I was good at this. I was exceptional at this. I did 2 tours. I racked up a confirmed kill count that would have made any of my father's staff officers envious. I came back with sand in my boots and a bronze star in my duffel bag. I went home to Virginia for leave. It was summer. The cicadas were buzzing. My parents were hosting a garden party. The lawn was perfect, the white wine was chilled, and the guests were the usual DC crowd. Lobbyists, contractors, and officers angling for promotions. I was wearing a sundress, covering the bruises on my shoulders from the rifle stock. I felt like an alien. The silence of the Hindu Kush was still ringing in my ears, but here, people were complaining about the humidity and the traffic on I-95. A woman approached me. Mrs. Gable, the wife of a senator. Lucia, darling, we haven't seen you in ages, she chirped, swirling her Chardonnay. Your father said you've been away. Where were you? I opened my mouth. I wanted to say, I was in the Petch River Valley, providing overwatch for the 101st Airborne. I haven't slept in a bed in 7 months. But before I could speak, my father's hand landed on my shoulder. It was heavy, possessive, and warning. She was in Europe, my father said loudly, smiling that practiced, charming smile. Backpacking, you know how millennials are. Finding herself in hostels in France and Italy. I froze. Mrs. Gable laughed. Oh, how wonderful. Paris in the spring is to die for. I looked at my father. He didn't look at me. He was already scanning the crowd for someone more important to talk to. He had lied. He had turned my service, my sacrifice, my blood and sweat into a vacation. Why? Because a daughter who kills terrorists doesn't fit the narrative of the general's sweet family. It was too messy, too masculine. It threatened his spotlight. I stood there, surrounded by power and wealth, and I realized I was invisible. I didn't correct him. I didn't make a scene. I just took a sip of my iced tea and let the lie settle over me like a shroud. That was the moment Lucia died, and Ghost was truly born. When I returned to base, my team started noticing something. I didn't hang out at the O Club. I didn't brag about my shots. I didn't tell war stories. I would do the job, file the report, and vanish. Where the hell is Neves? My CO asked one day after a mission briefing. Gone, sir, Marcus Hale, then a lieutenant commander, said, looking at the empty chair where I had been sitting seconds ago. She's like a ghost. You don't see her until she wants you to, and she's gone before you can thank her. Ghost. The name stuck. Later, when I got my top secret clearance and joined the Special Activities Division, I chose my call sign. Ghost 13. The number 13 was for bad luck. My father's bad luck. Because he thought he had buried me under his lies. He thought he had shamed me into silence. He didn't realize that by ignoring me, by forcing me into the shadows, he had given me the perfect cover. He had trained me to be invisible. And invisibility is a sniper's greatest weapon. The Rusty Anchor wasn't the kind of place you found on Yelp. It was a dive bar tucked away on a service road 3 miles outside the base's main gate. It had no windows. The floor was perpetually sticky with spilled domestic draft, and the air smelled like a combination of stale hops, lemon disinfectant, and sweat. To a civilian, it might have looked like a hole in the wall. To us, it was a cathedral. It was Friday night. The jukebox in the corner was playing George Strait, the low twang of the guitar competing with the sharp clack-clack of pool balls and the roar of laughter from the booths. I sat at a scratched wooden table near the back, nursing a bottle of Miller High Life. I wasn't wearing my uniform. I was in jeans and a gray t-shirt, my hair let down for the first time in days. Around me sat my team, my real family. There was Tex, a heavy weapons specialist from Houston who could strip a machine gun in 30 seconds blindfolded. There was Miller, our comms guy, who looked like a high school accountant but had a purple heart for dragging a wounded Marine out of a burning Humvee. And then there was the memory of the man who had brought us all together. I stared at the condensation dripping down my beer bottle, and my mind drifted back to a briefing room in Kandahar, 6 months prior. It was the first time I had worked directly with Colonel Marcus Hale. It had been a joint operation, high stakes, a hostage rescue in the mountains. We had been pinned down in a valley, taking heavy fire from 3 sides. The extraction bird couldn't land. We were running low on ammo. I had found a perch, a jagged outcropping of rock 500 yards up. I stayed there for 12 hours, baking in the sun, calculating wind speeds that were swirling unpredictably through the canyon. I took 9 shots. I dropped 9 tangos. Each one was a threat that was about to flank Hale's team. When we finally got back to base, covered in dust and adrenaline, I expected the usual. I expected the SEALs to go to their own debrief, ignoring the Air Force support. Instead, Marcus Hale had walked right up to me in the mess hall. He was covered in grime, his face streaked with sweat. He didn't smile. He didn't flirt. He looked me dead in the eye. He slammed a fresh bottle of water on the table in front of me. "Nevies," he had said, his voice gravelly. "Sir?" I had stood up, instinctively. "Sit down," he ordered, but not like my father. It was an order given with respect. He leaned in, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "That shot on the RPG gunner, the one at 11 o'clock? "Windage was tricky, sir," I replied. "You saved my point man's life," Hale said. "You are the all-seeing eye, Major. Without you up on that rock, we would have come home in body bags today." He clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. It wasn't possessive, it was an affirmation. "You're a weapon, Neves, a damn fine one." That moment was worth more to me than every medal my father had ever displayed in his shadow boxes. Hale hadn't seen a woman. He hadn't seen a general's daughter. He had seen a warrior. Back in the rusty anchor, a hand waved in front of my face, snapping me out of the memory. "Earth to Ghost," Tex laughed, sliding a pitcher of beer onto the table. "You're 1,000 yards staring again. Drink up. Tabs on me tonight." I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. "Thanks, Tex." "Hey," said a raspy voice from the seat next to me. I turned. It was Master Sergeant Elena Rodriguez. She was 50 years old, tough as leather, with gray streaks in her hair and a cynical look in her eyes that had seen too many commanders come and go. She was nearing retirement, and she had become the unofficial mother hen of our unit, if mother hens drank whiskey neat and smoked Marlboro Reds. Elena took a sip of her drink and looked at me with piercing intelligence. "I heard about the briefing today, about the promotion list." I stiffened. "I didn't make the cut for the command track. Again." "And let me guess," Elena said, her voice dropping. "Daddy Dearest had something to do with that?" I shrugged, tracing the rim of my bottle. "He says I'm not ready. He says I need more administrative experience. He thinks the field is making me rough." Elena scoffed, blowing a plume of imaginary smoke. She leaned in close, her tone shifting from casual to intense. "Listen to me, Lucia. I've served under men like Arthur Neves for 30 years. I know the type." She pointed a calloused finger at my chest. "He isn't blind. He knows exactly how good you are. That's the problem." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "He's jealous," Elena whispered. "He's an old guard officer. He made his rank shaking hands and playing golf. You? You make your rank in the dirt. You have respect. Real respect. The kind he can't buy. Don't let the old man's shadow block your sun, kid. He's terrified that one day you're going to outshine him. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Jealous? My father? The great general? It seemed impossible. Yet, as I looked around the table at Tex and Miller laughing, at the way they treated me as an equal, as a vital part of the machine, I realized Elena might be right. Here, I was Ghost 13. I was essential. My phone buzzed violently on the table, rattling against the wood. The screen lit up. The name, Dad, flashed in bright, demanding letters. The laughter at the table seemed to fade. The warmth of the bar evaporated. I reached for the phone, my stomach tightening into a knot. I opened the text. Be home by 800 tomorrow. Mom is stressing about the BBQ for the senator. The cleaning crew missed the downstairs bathroom and the patio furniture needs scrubbing. Wear something nice. No camo. I stared at the words. Scrubbing patio furniture. I was a Tier 1 asset. I was the all-seeing eye capable of hitting a target from a mile away. My hands, which had saved Navy SEALs from death, were being summoned to clean toilets and wipe down chairs because my father wanted to impress a politician. The irony was so sharp it tasted like blood in my mouth. Tex looked over, seeing the change in my expression. Bad news. Recall order? I looked at him. I looked at this family of misfits who would take a bullet for me. Then I looked back at the phone. No, I said, my voice quiet. Just a reminder of my place. I picked up my beer and drained it in one long swallow. The bitterness of the hops matched the bitterness in my heart. I have to go, I said, standing up. I have duty tomorrow. Duty? Miller asked. It's Saturday. Yeah, I said, grabbing my keys. Janitorial duty. I walked out of the warmth of the rusty anchor and into the humid Florida night. Behind me, the music played on. Ahead of me lay the mansion, the BBQ, and the man who wanted to turn a wolf into a golden retriever. But Elena's words echoed in my mind with every step. He's terrified that one day you're going to outshine him. Maybe it was time to stop cleaning the furniture and start flipping the table. It was exactly 7 days before the incident in the briefing room. 1 week before the world would learn the name Ghost 13. The setting was the Officers' Club at Langley Air Force Base. It was the annual gala, a night where the air smelled of expensive cologne, prime rib, and the desperate sweat of colonels trying to make general. The lighting was dim, the jazz band was playing a soft rendition of Fly Me to the Moon, and the room was filled with the clinking of crystal glasses. I arrived at 1900 hours sharp. I had spent an hour in front of my mirror preparing. I wasn't wearing a cocktail dress. I wasn't wearing pearls. I was wearing my service dress blues. My uniform was immaculate. The silver oak leaves of my major rank gleamed on my shoulders. My ribbon rack, though I kept the most sensitive operations off of it, was still impressive. 3 rows of commendations that represented blood, sweat, and sand. I felt proud. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged in this world. I spotted my father across the room. He was holding court near the open bar, surrounded by a senator and 2 defense contractors. He looked the part of the distinguished statesman. Tuxedo perfectly tailored, a scotch in one hand, a cigar in the other. I walked over, shoulders back. Good evening, General. He turned. His smile, which had been beaming at the senator, vanished the second his eyes landed on me. He looked me up and down, his lip curling in distaste. Lucia, he said, his voice dropping so the others couldn't hear. What are you wearing? I blinked, confused. It's a military gala, Dad. This is the appropriate uniform. For a man, he hissed. You look like a damn chauffeur. I told your mother to buy you that blue silk dress. The one that actually shows you have a figure. He sighed, shaking his head as if I had personally insulted him. God, you make it so hard to help you. Senator Miller brought his son tonight. He's an investment banker. I wanted to introduce you. How am I supposed to sell him on this? He gestured vaguely at my uniform, at the medals on my chest, as if they were a stain. My stomach twisted. I wasn't a daughter to him. I wasn't an officer. I was livestock to be traded. I'm not here to find a husband, General, I said stiffly. I'm here to represent my unit. Before he could retort, a young lieutenant approached us. It was Lieutenant Evans, a kid from my intel team. He saw me and immediately snapped to attention. Good evening, Major Nieves, Evans said, his voice full of genuine respect. He didn't see a woman in a costume. He saw his superior officer. My father's eyes narrowed. He hated it. He hated seeing someone respect me without his permission. At ease, Lieutenant, my father interrupted, stepping between us. He placed a hand on my shoulder, heavy, patronizing. He smiled at Evans, but it was a shark smile. Lucia isn't on duty tonight, son. She's just here as my daughter. He turned to me, his grip tightening on my shoulder. Sweetheart, the senator's glass is empty. Why don't you run to the bar and get him a refill? Gin and tonic, extra lime, and get me another scotch while you're at it. The air left my lungs. Lieutenant Evans looked confused. He looked from me to the general. He knew it was wrong. You don't ask a field-grade officer to fetch drinks like a waitress. Dad, I whispered, my face burning. There are servers for that. I asked you to do it, my father said, his voice raising just enough for the surrounding circle to hear. Go on, little Lucia. Make yourself useful. Don't just stand there looking stiff. The senator chuckled, oblivious to the power play. A gin and tonic would be lovely, dear. I stood there for a heartbeat. I could see Lieutenant Evans looking at the floor, embarrassed for me. I could feel the eyes of the other officers, my rank, my experience, my sacrifices. They were all stripped away in seconds. To him, I was just the help. I swallowed the rage that tasted like bile. Yes, sir. I walked to the bar. My legs felt heavy, the walk of shame. I ordered the drinks, the bartender giving me a sympathetic look that made it 10 times worse. I carried the crystal glasses back across the room, feeling like every step was a betrayal of the uniform I wore. I handed the senator his drink. I handed my father his scotch. Good girl, my father said, patting my cheek. See? That wasn't so hard. I turned to leave, needing air, needing to scream. But my father grabbed my elbow. His grip wasn't fatherly now. It was painful. He steered me away from the group, toward a secluded alcove near the kitchen entrance. He leaned in close. The smell of expensive scotch on his breath was overpowering. The mask of the benevolent general was gone. His eyes were cold, hard flint. I saw that look in your eye, he whispered, his voice a low growl. Don't you ever embarrass me like that again. Don't you ever hesitate when I give an order. I pulled my arm away. You humiliated me. In front of my subordinate. Humiliated you? He laughed, a cruel, dry sound. You have no status unless I give it to you. You think those medals mean anything? You think that rank means anything? I made calls to get you into the academy. I made calls to keep your record clean. You are my creation, Lucia. He leaned closer, his face inches from mine. And remember this. I made you. I can break you. I can strip those oak leaves off your shoulder with one phone call. So, know your place. You are my daughter first, an officer second, and only when I say so. He straightened his tuxedo jacket, smoothed his tie, and the mask clicked back into place. Now, go fix your face. You look emotional. It's unbecoming. He walked back to the party, leaving me standing alone in the shadows of the hallway. I drove home in silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. I was past sadness. I was in a place far colder than sadness. I walked into my apartment and went straight to the bathroom. I turned on the harsh vanity lights. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked at the woman in the blue uniform. I saw the marks on my arm where he had grabbed me. I realized something in that moment. He didn't just want to control me. He wanted to own me. He believed I was his property. And as long as I sought his approval, as long as I played by his rules, I was his property. If you have ever had your hard-earned achievements dismissed by the very people who should be proud of you, please hit the like button and comment. I define my own worth below. Let's show the world that we are not defined by anyone's opinion but our own. I unbuttoned my collar. I took off the uniform jacket and hung it carefully. I made you. I can break you. I repeated his words to the empty room. No, Dad, I whispered to my reflection. You didn't make me. The Air Force made me. The war made me. The pain made me. And he couldn't break me. Because you can't break a ghost. Next week was the strategic briefing at MacDill. He would be there. I would be there. I washed my face with cold water. When I looked up, the scared daughter was gone. Ghost 13 stared back. Next time, I vowed, I won't fetch the drinks. Next time, I bring the storm. Sit down, Lucia. You are a zero. Don't embarrass me. My father's voice was still echoing off the acoustic tiles of the briefing room walls. The laughter of the sycophants, the lieutenant colonels and majors who built their careers on laughing at my father's jokes, was still rippling through the air. It was the moment I had feared my entire life. Public humiliation. The stripping of my dignity in front of the very people I served with. But something strange happened. I didn't shrink. I didn't crumble. I didn't look at my shoes or apologize or scurry away like the mouse he wanted me to be. I felt calm. It was the kind of calm you feel right before you squeeze the trigger. The world slowed down. The ambient noise, the hum of the server racks, the rustle of papers, the snickering, faded into a dull buzz. I kept standing. My posture was perfect. My chin was parallel to the floor. I didn't look at my father. I looked through him. My eyes were locked on the Navy SEAL standing 10 feet away. Colonel Marcus Hale hadn't laughed. He hadn't moved. He was staring at me with an intensity that burned hotter than the fluorescent lights. Major! My father barked, his face flushing a dangerous shade of purple. He took a step toward me, his hand raised as if he were about to strike a disobedient child. I gave you a direct order. Sit down before I have the MPs drag you out of here for insubordination. The room went deadly silent. The laughter died instantly. Threatening a field officer with military police in a briefing was a step too far, even for General Neves. The air grew heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. Marcus Hale moved. He didn't step toward my father. He stepped between us. He turned his back on the general, a breach of protocol so flagrant it drew a gasp from the front row. Hale looked directly at me. Major Neves. Colonel, I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the adrenaline flooding my veins. I asked for a specific asset, Hale said, his voice low and dangerous. I was told the asset was in this room. Are you claiming that identity? My father sputtered behind him. Colonel, I don't know what game you're playing, but my daughter is a logistics officer. She orders paper clips and schedules fuel trucks. She is not— Silence, Hale roared. The word cracked like a whip. My father froze, his mouth hanging open. No one told Arthur Neves to be silent. Not in his own base, not in his own kingdom. Hale didn't even turn around. He kept his eyes on me. I'm asking you a question, Major. Status and identifier? This was it, the point of no return. I took a breath. I let go of the daughter who cleaned patio furniture. I let go of the girl who hid ribbons under her bed. Ghost 13, I said. The name hung in the air. Sector? Hale asked. Sierra Tango, I replied. Hindu Kush Operation, Valley of Death. Overwatch for Team 6. Hale nodded, his expression unreadable. And your clearance level? I paused for a fraction of a second. I let my eyes drift to my father, who was standing there, blinking rapidly, his face a mask of confusion. Level 5, I said clearly. Yankee White, Special Access Program. The reaction was immediate, and it was catastrophic. My father's hand, holding his glass of water, began to tremble. Water sloshed over the rim, dripping onto his polished shoes. Level 5. He knew what that meant. Every officer in that room knew what that meant. My father was a 3-star general. He had level 3 clearance, top secret. He thought he was God. But level 5? That was the stratosphere. That was need to know so high that even generals weren't read in unless they were specifically required for the mission. It meant I reported to Shadows. It meant I knew things that would put him in prison if I whispered them in his ear. That's that's impossible, my father stammered, his voice losing all its boom. He looked around the room, desperate for an ally. She's lying. She's delusional. She works in supply. He looked at his chief of staff, a man named Colonel Roar. Tell him, Roar. Tell him she's just a paper pusher. But Colonel Roar wasn't looking at the general. He was looking at me, and for the first time in 10 years, he wasn't looking at me with pity. He was looking at me with awe. Sir, Roar said quietly, if she knows the Sierra Tango designator, we don't have access to those files. That's black ops. My father turned back to me, his eyes wide, searching for the child he thought he owned. But she wasn't there. Lucia, he whispered, you never told me. You never asked, I said. You were too busy telling everyone I was backpacking in Europe. A murmur erupted in the room. 200 officers began whispering at once. Did you hear that? Ghost 13, the sniper from the Korengal Valley? The general didn't know. How could he not know his own daughter is a Tier 1 operator? He treated her like a secretary. The realization hit them like a shockwave. The man they feared, the man who projected an image of all-knowing power, was a fool in his own house. He was the emperor with no clothes. Marcus Hale checked his watch. He was done with the drama. He had what he came for. We have a bird spinning on the tarmac, Hale said to me. Wheels up in 10 mics. You have your gear? Always, I said. It's in the trunk of my car, SOP. Get it, Hale ordered. We have an extraction team waiting in Yemen. I need eyes on the ground by 0600. Yes, sir. I stepped out of the row. I walked past the officers who had snickered at me minutes ago. They pulled their legs in, scrambling to get out of my way. Some of them even started to stand up, an instinctive reaction to the presence of a superior warrior. I reached the center aisle. My father was blocking my path. He looked smaller now. His shoulders were slumped. The confidence that usually radiated from him had evaporated, leaving behind a confused, aging man in a suit that suddenly looked too big for him. He reached out a hand as if to grab my arm, to pull me back into his control. Lucia, wait. We need to discuss this. You can't just leave. I forbid. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I just stopped and looked at him. I looked at the wrinkles around his eyes. I looked at the fear behind his bluster. For years, I had wanted to scream at him. I had wanted to rage, to list every injustice, every insult, every time he made me feel small. I thought this moment would feel like vengeance. I thought I would feel angry. But I didn't. I felt pity. He had spent his whole life building a shrine to himself, chasing rank and status, convinced that power came from the stars on your shoulder. He had missed the greatness standing right in front of him. He had missed me. You don't have the clearance to discuss this, General, I said softly. The words were a blade, but I delivered them with the gentleness of a nurse. Lucia, his voice cracked. Goodbye, Dad, I said. Enjoy your meeting. I walked past him. I walked toward the heavy double doors where Colonel Hale was waiting. The bright Florida sunlight was pouring in from the outside, blinding and white. As I crossed the threshold, I heard the sound of a glass shattering against the floor. I didn't turn back. I walked out of the air-conditioned nightmare and onto the tarmac. The heat hit me, smelling of jet fuel and freedom. The rotors of a Black Hawk helicopter were already spinning, cutting the air, waiting to take me to a war where the bullets were real, but the enemies were honest. I was done fighting for his approval. Now, I was fighting for my life. And for the first time, I liked my odds. The coordinates didn't exist on any civilian GPS. We were at a black site, dug deep into the rocky terrain of Yemen, somewhere north of the Hadramaut Mountains. The air here was different from Florida. It didn't smell like floor wax and old coffee. It smelled of diesel, burning trash, and the ozone tang of high-voltage electronics. I sat in the Tactical Operations Center, TOC, a temporary structure reinforced with sandbags and Kevlar sheeting. The hum of cooling fans from the server racks was the only constant sound. On the wall, a bank of high-definition monitors showed drone feeds. grainy, green-tinted views of a village 3 miles away. I wasn't wearing my service dress blues anymore. I was wearing multicam fatigues, dusty and smelling of sweat. My hair was braided back tight against my scalp. In front of me sat the instrument of my trade, a Che-Tak M200 intervention. It wasn't just a rifle, it was a mathematical certainty. It fired a 408 round that could remain supersonic beyond 2,000 yards. "Ghost," a voice crackled in my earpiece. It was Marcus Hale. He was on the ground, leading a 4-man SEAL element through the labyrinth of mud brick houses in the valley below. "We are pinned. Sniper in the minaret. Sector 4. Do you have a solution?" I leaned into the scope. My world narrowed to a circle of glass. I found the minaret. I saw the heat signature of the enemy shooter. He was good. He had an elevated position and was suppressing Hale's team, keeping them from reaching the hostages. "Distance is 2,400 meters," I said calmly into the mic. 2,400 meters. That was over a mile and a half. In the briefing room back at MacDill, I was little Lucia, the girl who fetched gin and tonics. Here, I was God. No one in the Tussie asked who my father was. No one cared about my gender. They didn't care if I was pretty or if I should smile more. They cared about one thing. Could I do the math? "Wind is full value, left to right, 8 miles per hour," I muttered to myself, my fingers adjusting the turrets on the scope. Click. 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 I had to account for everything: the humidity in the air, the temperature of the propellant in the cartridge. I even had to calculate the Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth itself. The bullet would be in the air long enough that the planet would literally turn underneath it. "Ghost, we are taking heavy fire." Hale's voice was tight. "We need that window open. Now." "Stand by," I said. My pulse was resting at 50 beats per minute, ice water in my veins. I pulled back from the scope for a split second to check my wind meter. As I did, my personal sat phone, which I had left on the corner of the table, buzzed. It lit up the dim room. "Dad, 20 missed calls." I stared at the screen. He was blowing up my phone. Not because he was worried about my safety. He didn't even know where I was. He didn't have the clearance. He was calling because he was panicked. He was calling because he had lost control of the narrative. He was probably sitting in his office in Florida, realizing that the admin girl had just walked out on him with a Tier 1 operator, and he was terrified of what I might say. For 33 years, that buzzing phone had been a leash. When it rang, I answered. When he commanded, I obeyed. I looked at the flashing screen. Then I looked at the drone feed showing Hale's team huddled behind a crumbling wall, taking rounds. There was no choice. There never really was. I reached out and pressed the power button. I held it down until the screen went black. "Goodbye, General." I felt a physical weight lift off my chest. I wasn't his daughter right now. I wasn't a Neves. I was Ghost 13. I went back to the scope. "Solution set," I said. "Windage, 3 mils left. Elevation, 120. "Send it," Hale ordered. I exhaled. I waited for the natural pause between heartbeats. I squeezed the trigger. The recoil was a mule kick to the shoulder, even with the muzzle brake. The suppressed report was a sharp thwack that echoed in the small room. Then, the wait. At this distance, the bullet had a flight time of nearly 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. On the drone feed, the heat signature in the minaret suddenly jerked backward and collapsed. Pink mist sprayed against the ancient stone wall. "Target down," I reported, my voice flat. "The window is open." "Good effect on target," Hale replied. "Moving." I watched on the screen as Hale's team breached the building. I watched them drag the 2 hostages out, an aid worker and a journalist, and load them into the extraction vehicle. I didn't cheer. I didn't high-five the comms guy next to me. I just opened the bolt of my rifle, ejecting the spent brass casing. It hit the floor with a metallic chime. Job done. 3 hours later, the adrenaline had faded, replaced by the deep, bone-weary exhaustion that only combat brings. We were sitting in the debriefing area, sitting on crates of ammunition. I was drinking a warm, Rip It energy drink and eating peanut butter out of an MRE packet. Colonel Hale walked in. He was still covered in the dust of the valley. He walked over to where I was sitting. He didn't say anything at first. He just handed me a piece of paper. It was a draft of the after-action report, AAR, he was sending to the Joint Chiefs. I read the highlighted section. Objective achieved with 0 friendly casualties. Success of the mission is directly attributed to the precision support provided by Asset Ghost 13. Major Neves demonstrated superior technical capability and tactical judgment under extreme pressure. She is the most valuable asset of this operation. I looked up at him. You didn't have to write that, I said. Hale cracked open a can of dipping tobacco, packing his lip. I didn't write it to be nice, Neves. I wrote it because it's the truth. In my world, you get what you earn. And today? You earned every inch of that bird on your collar. He looked at my blacked-out phone sitting on the crate next to me. Everything okay on the home front? He asked. He knew. Of course, he knew. He had seen the show in the briefing room. It's quiet, I said, looking at the dark screen. For the first time in my life, it's finally quiet. Good, Hale said, standing up. Keep it that way. You can't aim if you're looking over your shoulder. I watched him walk away. I picked up the spent brass casing from the floor, the shell from the shot that saved them. I rolled it between my fingers. It was heavy. It was real. My father could have his medals. He could have his cocktail parties and his senators. He could have his lies about Europe. I had this. I had the dust, the math, and the respect of men who didn't give it away for free. I was 3,000 miles away from home, sitting in a dark room in Yemen, eating processed peanut butter. And for the first time in 33 years, I didn't feel like a disappointment. I felt like a soldier. While I was lying in the dust of a Yemeni valley, waiting for a target to show his face, a different kind of war was being fought back home in Florida. But this time, I wasn't the one taking fire. In the military, there is a communication network faster than fiber optics, more pervasive than satellite uplinks, and more destructive than a drone strike. It's called the rumor mill. We call it scuttlebutt. And for 3 days, General Arthur Neves was the only topic on the frequency. I wasn't there to witness it, but in the tight-knit world of special operations, nothing stays secret for long. Elena told me, Tex told me, even Lieutenant Colonel Rohr, my direct commanding officer in the visible world, eventually played me the tapes. The story of the briefing room incident didn't just walk out the door, it sprinted. It moved from the E-ring of the Pentagon down to the enlisted gym where privates were racking weights. The narrative was brutal in its simplicity. The general didn't know. For a man whose entire brand was built on total situational awareness and family values, this was a death sentence. The whispers in the hallways were no longer filled with fear. They were filled with ridicule. He tried to order a Tier 1 asset to sit down. He told a ghost to fetch him coffee. How can the man run a strategic command if he doesn't even know what his own daughter does for a living? The illusion of his omnipotence had shattered. But my father, being the narcissist he was, didn't go down quietly. He tried to claw back control the only way he knew how, by bullying. The day after I deployed, he made the call. I later listened to the recording in Lieutenant Colonel Rohr's office. It was a masterclass in desperation. The recording started with the sharp, aggressive tone of a man used to getting his way. Colonel Rohr, my father's voice barked through the speaker. I want the personnel jacket for Major Lucia Neves on my desk. Hard copy, unredacted, within the hour. Rohr's voice was calm, the voice of a man who knew he held the winning hand. General, you know I can't do that. Excuse me, my father snapped. I am a 3-star general. I am the base commander. I am her father. Do not quote protocol to me, Colonel. I want to see her file. I want to see this ghost designation. I want to know who authorized it behind my back. There was a pause on the line. I could imagine Rohr leaning back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. Sir, Rohr said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. Major Neves is currently assigned to a special access program under the jurisdiction of JSOC and the CIA. Her file is classified top secret SCI with a Yankee white designator. It is locked in a SCIF at the Pentagon. I have top secret clearance, my father shouted. The desperation was leaking into his voice now. He sounded shrill. You have level 3 clearance, General, Roar corrected him. Ghost 13 is a level 5 asset. You do not have the need to know. Access is strictly compartmentalized. Unless you have assigned authorization from the Secretary of Defense or the President, I cannot grant you access. And frankly, sir, neither can I. This is insubordination, my father roared. I will have your stars, Roar. I will have you scrubbing latrines in Alaska. I made you, and I can. And then, the kill shot. Roar interrupted him. He didn't shout. He spoke with the cold, metallic precision of a machine. General Neves, I must remind you that this line is recorded for security purposes. Any attempt to coerce a subordinate into revealing classified information regarding active clandestine operatives is a felony under the Espionage Act. Are you ordering me to commit a felony, General? Or would you like to terminate this call? Silence. Dead, heavy silence. For 10 seconds, the only sound on the tape was my father's heavy breathing. He was trapped. He was a man who had used rules to crush others his entire life, and now the rules had turned around and bitten him in the throat. Click. He hung up. But the humiliation didn't end in the privacy of his office. It spilled out into the officers' club, the O Club, the very place where he had tried to reduce me to a waitress just a week before. Elena described the scene to me later. It was lunchtime, the Wednesday after the incident. Usually, when General Neves walked into the O Club, it was like the Red Sea parting. Officers would stand, conversations would hush, and a line of people would form to shake his hand, hoping some of his power would rub off on them. That Wednesday, he walked in. He was wearing his dress uniform, every metal polished, trying to project business as usual. He walked to his usual table near the window, the power table. But the room didn't hush. The conversations didn't stop. People looked up, saw him, and then they looked away. They looked at their salads. They looked at their phones. They looked anywhere but at him. It wasn't an aggressive shunning. It was something far worse. It was indifference mixed with secondhand embarrassment. He sat down, alone. Usually a captain or a major would rush over to join him, eager for FaceTime. Today, the chairs around him remained empty. A server approached. A young woman, probably the same age I was when I enlisted. She placed a menu in front of him. Just the club sandwich and an iced tea, he said. His voice was quiet. Yes, General, she said, and walked away quickly. Elena told me she watched him from the bar. She watched the great Arthur Neves, the man who claimed to make people, sitting in a room full of 200 officers, eating a sandwich in absolute isolation. He checked his phone. No messages. He looked around the room. No eye contact. For the first time in 30 years, he was just an old man eating lunch alone. The power he thought he held, the power of fear, the power of reputation, had evaporated the moment the truth about me came out. Because if he couldn't control his own daughter, if he couldn't see the ghost living under his own roof, then he wasn't a genius strategist. He was just a bully who had been outsmarted. When I heard that story, sitting in the dust of Yemen, I expected to feel triumphant. I expected to laugh, but I didn't. I just felt a strange sense of closure. The karma hadn't come from me screaming at him. It hadn't come from a dramatic fight. It had come from the truth. He had spent his life trying to make me small so he could feel big. Now, the world knew exactly how big I was, and by comparison, just how small he had become. The statue had toppled. And nobody bothered to help him pick up the pieces. We met on neutral ground. That was the first rule of the engagement. Not at his house, where the shadow boxes of his medals lined the walls like religious icons. Not at the base, where the weight of rank and protocol would suffocate any chance of honesty. We met at a Starbucks in South Tampa, 3 blocks from the bay. It was a Tuesday morning, 3 months after I had walked out of the briefing room and onto a Black Hawk helicopter. The air conditioning inside the cafe was freezing, a sharp contrast to the humid Florida heat outside. The air smelled of roasted beans and burnt milk. Indie folk music played softly over the speakers, competing with the aggressive whir of the espresso grinders. I arrived 5 minutes early. Punctuality was a habit I couldn't break. I ordered a black coffee, venti, no sugar, and found a table in the back corner. When he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. General Arthur Neves had always been a man of structure. Even on weekends, his shirts were starched, his shoes were polished, and his posture was rigid enough to calibrate a level against. The man who walked through the glass doors looked like a stranger. He was wearing a beige polo shirt that was slightly too loose around the shoulders and wrinkled khaki shorts. He wasn't wearing his military-issue dress shoes. He was wearing loafers. Without the uniform, without the stars on his collar to prop him up, he looked small. He looked like just another retiree, another snowbird, waiting out the winter. He spotted me and hesitated. For a brief second, I saw the urge to retreat in his eyes, but he steeled himself and walked over. "Lucia," he said. His voice lacked the boom I was used to. It was scratchy, tentative. "Dad," I nodded, gesturing to the empty chair. He sat down heavily. He had a paper cup in his hand, and he began to peel the cardboard sleeve off it, strip by strip. It was a nervous tick I had never seen before. "You look fit," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Deployment went well?" "Mission accomplished," I said. "We got the target. Hostages are home." "Right, good. That's good." Silence stretched between us. It wasn't the comfortable silence of two soldiers. It was the heavy, loaded silence of a minefield. He took a sip of his coffee and grimaced. "Too hot. Everything is too hot these days." He put the cup down and finally looked at me. "Lucia, about that day. At MacDill." Here it comes, I thought, the justification, the pivot. "I didn't know," he started, spreading his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "I had no idea you were involved in that level of operations. If I had known..." "If you had known, what?" I asked calmly. "You would have treated me with respect. You would have listened to me. I would have protected you," he snapped, a flash of the old general breaking through. "Do you have any idea how dangerous that world is? Black Ops? CIA oversight? It's a meat grinder, Lucia. I pushed you toward administration because I wanted you safe. I wanted you to have a normal life, a husband, kids, Sundays off." He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "I'm your father. My job is to keep you safe. I only wanted what was best for you." It was the classic defense. The narcissist's prayer. I didn't do it, and if I did, it wasn't that bad. And if it was, I did it for your own good. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fear behind the bluster. He wasn't just afraid for my safety. He was afraid of his own irrelevance. He was afraid that the daughter he viewed as an extension of himself had grown a limb he couldn't control. I thought about Dr. Henry Cloud. I thought about the book on boundaries that Elena had given me years ago. Boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary shows me where I end and someone else begins. For 33 years, I had no boundaries. I was just an annex of Arthur Neves's ego. Not anymore. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't list his failures or throw the past in his face. That was what a child would do. I placed my hands flat on the table. "Dad," I said. My voice was low, level, and absolute. He stopped tearing at the coffee sleeve. "I am not a child you need to protect," I said. "I am a field-grade officer in the United States Air Force. I have killed men who were trying to kill my friends. I have made decisions that saved lives. I don't need your protection." "But..." "Let me finish," I interrupted, holding his gaze. "I understand you think you were helping, but you weren't. You were erasing me. You were ashamed of who I was because I didn't fit the picture you wanted to paint for your friends." He opened his mouth to argue, but the look in my eyes stopped him. It was the ghost stare. The look that said target acquired. "We are going to have a new relationship, Dad," I continued. or we are going to have no relationship at all. He blinked, stunned. Lucia, don't be dramatic. We're family. Family is not a free pass to disrespect me, I said. So here are the rules. This is the new baseline. I leaned in closer, ensuring he heard every syllable. Number 1. You will never dismiss my rank or my service in public again. Number 2. You will never call me Little Lucia or tell me to fetch drinks like a servant. Number 3. You do not get to take credit for my achievements, and you do not get to lie about them to save face. I took a breath. This was the hardest part, the part where I let go of the need for his validation. I don't need you to be proud of me, Dad, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. I really don't. I'm proud of myself. What I need is for you to respect me, as an adult, as an equal. The cafe noise seemed to fade away. The grinder stopped. The indie music lulled. My father sat there, frozen. He looked at me as if he was seeing me for the very first time. He looked for the desperate little girl who used to hide ribbons under her bed. He looked for the teenager who begged for his attention at the dinner table. They were gone. Sitting across from him was a woman who didn't need him. And that realization seemed to age him another 5 years right in front of my eyes. He looked down at his coffee cup, now shredded and cold. He took a long, shaky breath. He started, his voice cracking. He cleared his throat. I didn't realize how much I had missed. It wasn't a full apology, it wasn't a confession of guilt, but for a man like Arthur Neves, it was a white flag. He looked up at me. The arrogance was gone. In its place was a quiet, resigned acceptance. Respect, he repeated the word, tasting it. Okay, Lucia. He nodded. It was a slow, deliberate nod, a salute without the hand. Okay, I echoed. I finished my coffee. It was cold and bitter, but it tasted like victory. I stood up. I have to get back to base. We have a briefing at 1400. He stood up too, out of habit. Right, duty calls. There was an awkward moment where a hug might have happened in a Hallmark movie, but this wasn't a movie. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. The distance between us was still there, vast and full of old scars, but at least now there was a bridge. A narrow, fragile bridge built on boundaries. Drive safe, Major, he said. I paused. He had called me Major. Not sweetheart, not honey, Major. You too, Arthur, I said. I didn't call him Dad. Not right then. I called him by his name, acknowledging him as a man, flawed and human, just like me. I turned and walked out of the Starbucks. I pushed open the door and stepped into the blinding Florida sun. The heat wrapped around me, but I didn't mind. I walked to my car, unlocked the door, and sat in the driver's seat. I checked the rearview mirror. I could see him through the window of the cafe, sitting alone at the table, staring at the empty chair where I had been. I put the car in gear and drove away. I hadn't won a war. I hadn't destroyed him. I had done something much harder. I had redefined the terms of peace, and for the first time in my life, I was free. Time in the military is measured in deployments, in duty stations, and in the slow, steady accumulation of gray hairs. 10 years. A decade had passed since I walked out of that coffee shop in Tampa. A decade since I drew a line in the sand and dared my father to cross it. Today, the auditorium at Langley Air Force Base was filled to capacity. The air smelled of floor wax and fresh-cut lilies. The American flag stood tall and unmoving on the stage, the gold fringe catching the overhead lights. I stood at the podium. My uniform had changed. The gold oak leaves of a major were gone, replaced by the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel. I looked out at the sea of blue uniforms. 200 faces looked back at me. They weren't looking at me with fear. They weren't looking at me because they were forced to. They were looking at me with trust. I was their commander now. Attention to orders, the adjutant barked. The room snapped to attention. The sound of 200 pairs of boots hitting the floor in unison echoed like a thunderclap. I didn't flinch. I didn't puff out my chest. I just stood there, breathing in the moment. My eyes scanned the front row. Usually this was reserved for VIPs, for generals, and senators. But today, there was an old man sitting in the seat of honor. Arthur Neves was 70 years old now. He wasn't wearing his dress uniform. He had retired 5 years ago. He was wearing a charcoal gray civilian suit that fit him a little too loosely. His hair, once a steel gray high and tight, was now completely white and thinning. He wasn't the god of war anymore. He was just a grandfather who played golf on Tuesdays and complained about his arthritis. He wasn't invited up to the stage to pin my rank on. I had chosen Master Sergeant Elena Rodriguez, now retired and walking with a cane, to do that honor. It was a subtle choice, but a deliberate one. Rank is earned in the trenches, not inherited through DNA. But my father didn't look angry. He didn't look slighted. As Elena's shaking hands fastened the silver insignia onto my collar, I looked down at him. He was crying. They weren't the crocodile tears of a manipulator. They were quiet, silent tears rolling down cheeks that had lost their firmness. He caught my eye and offered a small, wobbly smile. It was a sad smile, the smile of a man who realized too late that he had spent 30 years betting on the wrong horse, but was grateful he was allowed to watch the race finish. I nodded at him. Acknowledgement. Peace. Ladies and gentlemen, I said into the microphone, my voice clear and steady. Command is not a privilege, it is a burden, and it is a burden I will carry for you, not over you. I didn't quote Sun Tzu, I didn't quote Patton. I spoke to them like humans. I treated them with the dignity that I had starved for when I was a young officer. After the ceremony, the reception line formed. There was punch and sheet cake. The atmosphere was light. My father stayed in the back, holding a paper cup of punch, watching me work the room. He didn't try to take over. He didn't interrupt. He stayed within the boundaries we had built, brick by brick, over the last 10 years. A young woman approached me. She was a second lieutenant, fresh out of the academy. Her uniform was brand new, stiff, and uncomfortable. She looked terrified. "Ma'am," she squeaked. "Lieutenant Sarah Jenkins, I wanted to say congratulations." I smiled, remembering the terrified girl I used to be. "Thank you, Lieutenant. How are you adjusting to the squadron?" She hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "It's hard, ma'am. My family. My dad is a colonel in the Marines. He thinks the Air Force is a soft branch. He wanted me to be a JAG lawyer. He says I'm wasting my potential in intel." I froze. The words were different, but the melody was exactly the same. The ghost of the past, echoing in this young girl's voice. I handed my piece of cake to an aide and turned my full attention to her. I stepped into her personal space, not to intimidate, but to shield her. "Lieutenant, look at me," I said firmly. She looked up, her eyes wide. "I'm going to tell you something that took me 33 years and a lot of heartache to learn," I said. "Your father may have given you your name, but he does not get to write your story." She blinked, surprised by the intensity in my voice. "Do not let anyone define your value," I continued. "Not your enemies, and certainly not your blood. You are not here to be his legacy. You are here to build your own." The young lieutenant straightened up. It was subtle, but I saw it. A spark in her eyes, a shifting of weight, the beginning of a backbone. "Yes, ma'am," she said, and this time her voice didn't squeak. "Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel." "Carry on, Lieutenant." As she walked away, walking a little taller than before, a quote from Maya Angelou drifted through my mind. It was something I had read during those long, lonely nights in Yemen. "I come as one, but I stand as 10,000. I wasn't just Lucia anymore. I was the sum of every woman who had been told to sit down. I was the voice for every child who had been told they weren't enough. I stood for them." The reception wound down. The room emptied. My father walked over to me. He looked tired. "That was a good speech, Lucia," he said softly. "Thanks, Dad." He looked at the silver oak leaves on my shoulders. He reached out a hand, hovering it for a moment, then patted my arm awkwardly. "You wear it better than I did." It was the closest he would ever get to saying I was wrong, and it was enough. Do you want to get dinner? He asked. Mom is making pot roast. I checked my watch. I can't. I have a flight to catch. Pentagon briefing in the morning. He nodded, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes, but he masked it quickly. Of course. Duty first. I understand. I'll call you on Sunday, I said. Sunday, he repeated. Okay. He turned and walked toward the exit, a lonely figure in a big hall. I watched him go, feeling a twinge of sadness, but no guilt. I had forgiven him, but I hadn't forgotten. The relationship was healed, but the scar would always be there to remind me of where the boundary line was drawn. I turned and walked out the side door. The Virginia sun hit my face, warm and golden. The sky above Langley was a piercing, endless blue, the kind of sky that begged to be flown in. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the air of freedom. I wasn't little Lucia. I wasn't even Ghost 13 anymore. That was a name for the shadows, for a woman who had to hide her greatness to survive. I walked toward my car, my heels clicking rhythmically on the pavement. I didn't need to hide. I didn't need to vanish. My name is Lucia Nieves. I am a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't running away from anything. I was flying. If there is one thing I want you to take away from my journey, it is this. You hold the pen to your own life story. For years, I let my father hold the pen. He wrote me as a victim, a disappointment, and a shadow. But the moment I took that pen back, I realized I wasn't any of those things. I was a warrior. Please remember that setting boundaries with toxic family members isn't an act of hate. It is an act of radical self-love. You do not need their permission to be great. You do not need their apology to move forward. Your value is not a gift they give you. It is a fortress you build yourself. Now, I want to hear from you. We all have a General Nieves in our lives, someone who tried to keep us small so they could feel big. But look at you. You are still here. You are still standing. If my story resonated with your heart, please hit that like button. It helps other ghosts find this message of hope. And in the comments below, I want you to make a declaration. Type, I am the commander. Own your life. Own your future. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true stories of justice and resilience. Until next time, stay strong and keep flying.